Hello, lovelies, and happy Mother's Day. Welcome to the second episode of the Soul Alignment Project. And in the spirit of motherhood and the creator life, I thought it would be a mother of an episode to talk about our darkness and how it can bring us back home to our light within. Interestingly enough, a fetus grows in darkness, and the difficulty of labor brings a tiny little soul to the presence of light. Before I start, I do need to make the disclaimer: I'm not a psychologist, a doctor, or even trained. I am self-taught from the desire to self-love myself again and align my head and my heart. The notions below or in this conversation are just my beliefs, and they don't need to be yours. Just want to bring a different perspective to the world from a place of love. So let's start by defining what love is. Well, love is love. Let's start by defining what darkness is. The actual definition of what darkness is well, the absence of light, correct? But what is the emotional definition of darkness? And what might that be for you? For some of us, it might be despair, loss of hope, trauma, hardships, adversity, self-sabotage, depression, anxiety, and the list can go on and on. So I always try to be vulnerable in my episodes, and I really want to speak some truth from my own experience with my own darkness. My darkness showed up very young, and the more I splintered away from my head and my heart and splintered away from myself, the darker life was. As a teenager, I tried to commit suicide, and I nearly succeeded. And in that experience, I had a near-death experience. Well, interestingly, I didn't even find my light from that darkness. And for many decades to come, I self-sabotaged and had a lot of hatred. It took years of self-sabotage and hatred before I could truly see my light through my darkness. So the more I self-pitied and wallowed in that self-pity, the more I pushed my light and my authenticity away. And eventually the light within me was just a tiny little flicker, still there, but barely. Darkness in life is simply just a perception of what might seem hopeless, a stoic place of despair. But what if our despair is actually our knight in white armor, or knight in shining armor, or at least leading us to that night? In my experience, that's kind of what it was. So let me explain and ask some questions for you to ponder for yourself. How could one ever find light if they didn't fear living in the darkness? What is the guiding light out of our storms of life? How can one learn to love themselves if they didn't know what self-sabotage was? What is the driving force to overcome our adversity? How would one become resilient if we didn't have trauma? And what leads us through that trauma? How do we learn to become whole human beings if we didn't experience anxiety and depression? For me personally, I experienced anxiety and depression for years. I still do. I've learned to manage it. It's just part of who I am. But really, it was the worry. My anxiety was the worry of the expectations of the future and what was going to happen in the future. And I was stuck in the sadness of my past. I didn't know how to let go of it, and I hadn't healed yet. But with every hardship and days of darkness and years of my suffering, I never lost faith. And through each traumatic event that I endured, and I promise you there were many, I'm only going to touch on a few here, I found my saving grace or light within that. And for me, that was called faith. Eventually, these adversities were my knight in white armor. I always kind of mix things up, so bear with me. I did have a brain injury a long time ago, and sometimes I say things incorrectly or say them backwards, but just have a laugh at me. I always laugh at myself. So, as I went through these adversities and hardships in life, I started to find myself becoming more and more whole with each difficult moment that I went through. I looked for the hope that on the other side of darkness, well, there's Luna, light would be found. And there was, but that's all I had. Like, I didn't have anybody else. I was, alone most of my life, emotionally, and I just didn't have anything else. So I really had to find faith that I could find my light once again. So for example, when my dad died, all I could do was ask for his strength and spirit to kind of reside in my soul eventually. And it did. I know that sounds really weird, and maybe in another episode we can talk about that, but it did. I asked for his strength and courage, and I found it within myself eventually. When I started losing my hearing at 26, I found the faith and comfort that if that happened, I would hear the world differently. I would have no choice. When I almost lost my vision at 35 from a car accident, I trusted that if that happened, I would see the world in a different light, and that would be through, like, I actually envisioned it, it would be through like the feeling of my surrounding, because what else could you do if you go blind? Like, that's how you're going to have to see life, is through that feeling and that sixth sense. When I lost pregnancy after pregnancy, I found faith that the universe would bring me a healthier place of me, a better version of myself, so that I could carry the children that I was supposed to bring into the world. When my marriage ended, I had to find the faith to seek out and heal myself and learn to love myself. And I left my marriage out of a place of love for myself. And I think my ex-husband kind of knew that and supported that, and for that I'm grateful. And when I couldn't endure any more emotional abuse from my mom, and I do love my mom and I don't blame her for everything, so I just want to make that disclaimer. I really did walk away because I was finally in a place where I loved myself and I valued myself and I knew my worth and I knew what boundaries were, and I walked away out of love for myself while always keeping her in my thoughts and prayers, and knowing that this was the right thing to do in our relationship. So those are just a few of my personal hardships, and there were many, many more to come just within motherhood. I won't share my kids' stories. It's not really my story to tell. But I knew for their well-being, I had to be the one to break the generational trauma for them. And I needed to walk away out of my darkness. I had to find a way to walk through my darkness to find light and love for myself, for them. I mean, their trauma was heavy, but I was the only one who could learn to regulate myself and give them the guidance and love that they needed and that they deserve. And gratefully, we're there. We still have moments. So I want to apologize if I sound like a holy roller, and this is all about faith. And I promise I'm not a holy roller, but I am a very, very faithful human being. And faith in the darkness that I endured was honestly my salvation. But honestly, I just view faith as faith in yourself. It's the guiding light within each of us that is meant to navigate our life storms. Life is meant to be hard. The difficulty is our path back home to ourselves. It is our evolution and our salvation in the weirdest way possible, but it is. Without darkness, we can't seek our internal life and that driving force that we have within to be love and give love and receive love. So I do also want to apologize if this sounds like my life journey was a walk in the park. It was not. It was my experience, like my past was my experience. But I had to start somewhere, and for me that was faith and keeping faith. Then that faith eventually led me to desire to love myself once again. So there were years of therapy inner child healing, meditation, yoga, journaling. I really looked at all the tools that were presented in front of me as an open gateway into my driving force to heal, because without that life difficulties, there would be no driving force to heal. And without them, there would be no self-growth or discovery. And honestly, I think I'd still be sleepwalking. And, I think there's many people sleepwalking in the world. And sometimes when I went through these difficult moments and difficulties, I'd just be like, oh God, I can't take any more. I can't handle any more. It's too heavy. I'm one person. Please stop. But I feel sad for the people that just sleepwalk through life. They never become awakened to life, and they never learn to grow or evolve. And honestly, I go back to my difficulties were my knight in shining armor, or my white knight, whatever you want to call it. So you gotta eventually ask the question, how does one start healing their darkness? I say take a leap of faith and believe in yourself. Believe that you are worthy of yourself, and trust that these difficulties will bring you back home to your authentic self. Once you kind of start believing in yourself, you can learn to observe or disarm the ego, where all these thoughts start of unworthiness, and then start by making a healthy choice for you. Just one choice. Research something that feels right to you. Start a yoga class, go for a run, and just be with yourself and your thoughts. Maybe a counseling session to learn something about yourself. I know it's taboo and people are like, oh, therapy, but really I learned so much about myself from therapy, because really it's just an observer, a third party. AA, if you're struggling with addiction, anything one step closer to your heart center and leading you away from your ego's despair is a step forward to your evolution and self-love again. And honestly, if you really look at despair, it means the loss of hope. And it's just the thought. It's the thought surviving in your ego, and it's surviving through fear. I swear this world wants to keep us living in fear. And again, that's another episode. But, if you can just learn to shift one thought at a time about yourself, and when you're having and I know it's hard. It's so hard. I still get stuck there sometimes. I think these terrible thoughts, and I literally have to tell the commander in my brain, no, that's not true. That is just a story that you've made up, or whatever the case may be. But I do really want to emphasize, and I know if you're struggling, if you need anything, I will, message me. I will try and help you how I can, because I have suffered tremendously in my life. And the suffering was my own fault, I kept myself suffering there. But our suffering is meant to show us love and compassion for ourselves. But it's hard. And how do we get out of it? But really, again, it starts back with a mind shift. And even if that one mind shift in the beginning is just knowing your worth and just knowing how worthy you are, because we are all worthy of our own love. We are all worthy of learning resilience, and that's what life difficulties show us, is resilience. We are all worthy of ourselves. So, a mind shift, and then maybe the next mind shift is acceptance of your adversities. And kind of once you have acceptance of them and those hardships, you can slowly learn how to make peace with them. They're really, honestly, they're trying to show you how strong you really are, how you can get out of your own darkness and out of your own way and find your light within. I really struggled with making peace from our past, and how our past leads us out of despair. But, you know, it's different for each one of us. Sometimes it's forgiveness, and you don't have to forgive everybody. Forgiveness, you know, they say it's for yourself. It is probably in some circumstances, and others it's not, but you can learn to accept it and, you know, take the learning from it. So for me, it was learning acceptance of what life tossed my way. It was really looking at that darkness to finding the light in it, meaning finding the lessons or what it was trying to teach me or show me. It was being grateful for the challenges I had to endure so that I could finally learn to love me. Without them, I wouldn't learn that lesson at all. And once I found the faith in myself, my roles shifted, meaning my head and my heart aligned. And in this newfound alignment, it allowed me to let go of my own expectations of life. It allowed me to let go of my own suffering. It allowed me to get out of my own way. So, you know, on another note, in life, we're always going to have hard times. They are meant to be our biggest gifts, and eventually they will be your biggest gifts, the internal gifts. Worth, value, love, light. That is the gifts of darkness. And I finally, you know, learning to kind of ride the waves of darkness and find the tide within it. It was like such a huge growth within me. It was like a huge evolution. And our human experience needs the darkness to find the peace and the light. So I just want to say this as I kind of end here. You know, what is at the root of this message? For me, it's polarity and learning to understand and accept the opposition in any facet of life is the driving force back home. So without polarity in our lives, whether it's darkness, light, happy, sadness, you know, we can't evolve. So as a segue to episode 3, we will discuss both polarity in more detail. And remember this as a segue into polarity. Not Luna. Just remember this as a segue into polarity. On the other end of darkness is your light. So embrace your darkness. They will be your gifts in the end, I promise. With that, happy Mother's Day. Namaste. Love you all.